Our guest today served as an assistant U.S. attorney for 12 years in Chicago. During his tenure, he spearheaded several high-profile, highly successful, complex investigations. Our guest today's most notable achievement was leading the Operation Safe Road investigation, which culminated in the 6-month trial and conviction of former Illinois Governor George Ryan. Nearly 3 months ago, our guest today was appointed by Governor Patrick Quinn to chair the Illinois Reform Commission. The commission was formed to make recommendations for ethical reform for Illinois government. Our guest today earned his undergraduate degree from the University of Notre Dame and his law degree from the University of Chicago. Ladies and gentlemen, the chairman of the Illinois Reform Commission, Patrick Collins. Patrick? Have some fun up there.
Whenever I hear recently people talk about the George Ryan prosecution, I always wince because I think, geez, wouldn't it be great to have George Ryan as our governor right now? You know, when I was asked to speak by Jay, and I very much appreciate the invitation, the Reform Commission was started right here in this room. Lieutenant Governor Pat Quinn announced it, and he called me. He wanted to give this big, he asked me to come. He said, can you stand in the back, and I want to give you this introduction, and then can you stand up and wave? And so there was this big wind-up, and he said, I want to introduce you to the chairman of the Illinois Reform Commission, Patrick Fitzgerald. And then I stood up, and people were like, oh, my God, this isn't him. And so we didn't get off to a great start, but we think we had a great day yesterday. And I want to, before I get going, acknowledge two of my commissioners who are here. Hank Rocoto, can you stand up once again? I did not know Hanky. I knew her as a fierce journalist by reputation, and I cold called her, and I was expecting her to hang up on me, and lo and behold, she said, the newspaper business is bad, I'll do it. She was a wonderful commissioner, and I wish her the best of luck with the John Howard Association. They're going to get a very vivacious, energetic, smart administrator. So thank you, Hanky, for your work. And my other commissioner I'd like to acknowledge publicly, David Hoffman. David? Some people have called me, intense, focused, too serious. Whatever I am, David is times 3. He is a wonderful public servant, a very smart guy, incredibly hardworking. He's turned around the IG's office, made it a real force in city government, and I was very proud, David, to serve with you. And I understand you got an invitation to speak out of this luncheon here. And last but not least, there's a table in the back. Any of you saw the Tribune editorial today. I've been taking a lot of grief from my law firm because we get these billing records every month, and they're like, Collins, you got this pro bono matter, and it's a lot of hours. I'm like, yeah, we're almost done. And there's about 10 people, if I could ask the table to stand up, from Perkins Coie, the law firm I'm at. The Tribune published, which is accurate, that there were 4,500 hours of pro bono time put in, a lot of it in the last week, by the folks in the back room putting together this report, and very, very grateful for the work and the dedication of the folks there and my firm in general, Perkins Coie. Last acknowledgments real quick. I have to acknowledge my wife. We just had our 4th child, and I've been busy on other things. Helena. And my mom and dad. My dad learns how to use email, and he sends me reform ideas every day in the last 100 days. And that is one of the reasons I am so happy this is over. Okay. When I told Jay I wanted to speak, I said, Jay, I can hand out the report. For any of you who haven't read it yet, Dawn, we have the report. Or we can show a little video. And Jay said, show the video. So we're going to start out, as we did our press conference yesterday, with a 3-minute video that, to me, sort of captures why we need the reform that we proposed.
Being the governor of the state of Illinois might seem glamorous, but it's a dead end. It's a one-way ticket to Nowheresville. 50% of all Illinois governors end up in jail. For God's sakes, did you know, this is true, that only 48% of the people who commit murder end up in jail for their crime? You are more likely to end up in jail if you become the governor of Illinois than if you become a murderer.
This is a sad day for Illinois.
Governor Blagojevich.
Rod Blagojevich became the latest state leader to carry the baton of corruption.
He allegedly tried to shake down other politicians.
Attempted to extort campaign contributions.
He wanted a job for his wife. He wanted money.
Tried to get the Chicago Tribune's editorial board fired.
And auction off President-elect Barack Obama's Senate seat to the highest bidder.
If it isn't the most corrupt state in the United States, it's certainly one hell of a competitor.
Illinois has a reputation for dirty politics.
Corruption in Illinois is about as normal as frost in January.
Governor George Ryan.
Former Governor Otto Kerner.
Illinois Democrat Dan Rostenkowski.
Patronage Chief Robert Surridge.
Chicago Alderman Edward Doliak.
Political fundraiser Tony Resco.
Clerk James Lasky.
Commissioner Donald Tomczak.
Scott Faywell.
Arenda Troutman. Governor Dan Walker.
William Salini. Stuart Levine.
Alderman Ambrosio Medrano.
12th Chicago alderman convicted of wrongdoing in the last 20 years.
Guilty on all 22 counts.
On the way to prison.
He's now headed for jail.
Behind bars.
4 years behind bars.
67 months in jail.
6.5-year prison term.
Millions of dollars worth of state government fraud.
Illegally buying licenses.
And a huge shakedown scheme.
A $1.5 million kickback. 2 counts of money laundering.
$48,000 in bribes.
Paid to play politics.
Political favors.
Racketeering.
Bribery.
Extortion.
Mail fraud.
Tax fraud charges.
If there is to be significant reform, it'll come now, or it may not come at all.
Today, Commission officials released a sweeping blueprint for change in Illinois government.
Cleaning up state politics.
The Commission wants to strike while the iron is hot.
Among the Commission's recommendations, contribution limits similar to those for federal offices.
Illinois today is one of only 4 states with no contribution limits.
Real-time reporting of campaign contributions.
Every investigation I was involved in public corruption had a campaign contribution problem.
And moving the statewide primary election from February to June after the legislative session.
A shorter campaign cycle would, in theory, require less fundraising.
For state contracts, the Commission calls for an independent procurement office with an independent monitor, and to make state contracts transparent by disclosing all lobbyists and all subcontractors, something that doesn't happen now.
It's not going to solve all the problems. There's ways around it, but that's where we got to start.
Most of the recommendations will require legislative approval.
Many believe this is the time for major changes, or else incumbent lawmakers may not keep their job.
It's going to be in their self-interest to pass some laws.
We need to hold everybody's feet to the fire to make sure they're doing the right thing.
The legislature will follow when there's public pressure.
This is something that has wide support.
The game has moved to Springfield, but the power still lies with the voters.
What is the response going to be?
Pick up the telephone, call, demand it.
We actually showed that at our press conference yesterday, and after the press conference, when we handed our report to Governor Quinn in Springfield, his person pulled me aside and said, the governor would like that, but can we change the beginning about the people going to jail? And I said, no, that's the message. And I know Jim Mariner, who I respect a lot, and I've read some of his stuff of late about reformers and goo-goos, and I'm sure I know what Jim's reaction to stuff like this would mean. But I have to say, this 100-day journey that we had, if we can just take a step back and set aside the cynicism that we all have and ask the question, in the state of Illinois, right now, after what we've been through, and this litany and this parade, Can we do better? Legislatively, operationally, and attitudinally. And if anyone wants to say no to that, I'd like to have a debate anytime, anywhere, and discuss why that's not true. Will the system change if we just sit? And the answer, of course, is no. Will the folks in Springfield prefer to sort of hide under their desks and wait till May 31st comes? And the answer, of course, to that is yes, too. But the reality is there is something happening in Springfield. And again, we're late to this cause, and people like Senator Netsch and Cindy Canary and others in the room who have been at this a long time. No one here is suggesting that the Reform Commission, A, has all the answers, or B, is the first one in. But I have to say, there's something happening in Springfield that I think the Reform Commission can help push. We've set up in black and white, and we took a lot of time to do it. But if anybody wants to say reform is done this General Assembly session, it should be compared to what we have here, which isn't to say that this is all right, which isn't to say it shouldn't be debated, discussed, amended, et cetera. Of course it should. But we put it out there, and its limits are part of it, disclosure is part of it, government structure, redistricting. If you compare what Iowa does in redistricting to the stuff that we do in redistricting, it's crazy. And when we go around the state, we were in Quad Cities talking about redistricting, and an engineer stood up and said, you know what, I'm an engineer, why can't Illinois draw rectangles? And it was, you know, it's comments like that stick with me. There was a gentleman in Springfield that talked about, you know, I give $100, I give $500, and I believe in campaign contributions, I believe in supporting my candidate, but I am disenfranchised by these big contributions. And, you know, there are real people saying real things, and when folks want to poo-poo these and say that these are goo-goo things, these are things that don't matter, they do matter. And I think something is happening in Springfield in this legislative session. Just today, I got a call from Tom Cross, who asked if I might be willing to come to Springfield with my commissioners for a committee of the whole. I don't know what a committee of the whole is, but it sounds like something good. I was asked, and my wife doesn't know this yet, so I'm saying it publicly, I was asked by Senator Staines to come to Springfield tonight and to address a rump group of reps and senators. I don't know what a rump group is, but it sounds good to me. We got an email from Senator Cullerton's chief of staff that said if we get all our proposals into bill form by May 4th, they will go through the process. That's all we're asking for, and I see those as all good signs because there is pressure. And when I say pressure, I'm not suggesting anything illicit or improper, but pressure from the public, pressure from the media. The Tribune and the Sun-Times have been wonderful. The Daily Herald, which David and I visited yesterday, has been great. You know, there was a TV scrum of reporters when Governor Blagojevich was deciding on whether to go to Costa Rica or not. And again, I realize the news value of that. And I know Paul Green was probably the only person more disappointed than Blagojevich that he couldn't go to Costa Rica. But the reality is, think about that for a minute. There's 30 cameras outside the federal building, but when ethics reform is going to be debated in Springfield, how many TV trucks will be down there? And I think that's respectfully something for the media to consider. Come to Springfield and put folks on record where they are on ethics reform. And I think that will have a substantive change in what the end product is. I wanted to talk for just a few minutes about the commission that we put together. And again, we do have books for folks that want, and they are books. The commissioners, I want to read each person's name, and I'm not going to talk in detail, but the image of this Reform Commission was really to have a citizens group. And David used a line, but since he used it yesterday, I can steal it today. This is our verdict. We had our citizens jury, and this is our verdict. And the citizens we had on our jury were Pat Fitzgerald, a football coach, Tasha Green, a woman who runs High Jump, which works with kids at Chicago Public Schools. We had Father Dennis Holschneider, the president of DePaul University, one of Illinois' largest universities. We had Kate Mayer, who runs the Greater Chicago Food Depository. Some people ask, what's that person doing on it? But think about it. We talk about patronage, and we talk about the evils of patronage. Here's a woman who has to run a organization on idealism. She's a tough businesswoman, but she has a sense of the ideal, and that's how she runs her business. And isn't that something we should inject into government? There are people who have said that we're naive. Duane Nolan, former state rep, state senator from the heartland, he's a guy who was both the beneficiary of redistricting and was the loser in redistricting. He brought something to the table. Sheila Simon. I did not know Sheila. Obviously, I knew of her father. She's an incredible woman. I called her the road warrior. She lives in Carbondale. If there was something happening in any part of the state on 24 hours' notice, she would be there. And how do you do this? And she said, well, I have my dad's books on tape, and I jump in the car and I go. Wonderfully smart woman who, for all the sort of, forcefulness that I can exude, she just has this gentle, steely way about her. Really was impressed. Pam Davis, many of you know that name, CEO of Edwards Hospital, who thought she was being extorted and did the unthinkable, really, for corporate America. She went to the FBI and wore a wire. And as a former prosecutor who was not involved in that case but has some sense of how these things play out, I don't think it's an overstatement to say that if Pam Davis doesn't go to the FBI, there is no Tony Resco prosecution. There is no Salini prosecution. There is no Stuart Levine prosecution. And dare I say, there's no Rod Blagojevich prosecution, because she set in line a chain of events. They got up on Stuart Levine's phone because of her wearing a wire, and that was a treasure trove for them. Hank Rocoto, wonderful commissioner, believes in transparency, real transparency. David Hoffman, he hates it when I say he loves to talk about procurement. He also loves to talk about enforcement, two really important issues that we'd addressed. Doug Johnson. I called Doug Johnson the sort of average Joe on our committee, or he called himself that. If a neurologist who's a Marine can be an average Joe, that was Doug Johnson. Here's a guy who woke up one day, he runs a neurology practice in the suburbs, and decided that he should volunteer to go to Iraq to serve as a medic, and made that decision and went. And when people want to talk about public service and what we expect from our Springfield public servants, compared to what Doug Johnson's done for this country. Brad Mcmillan. Brad was the chief of staff for Ray LaHood. Brad also runs the School for Principal Leadership at Bradley University. Very passionate about redistricting, and he presented on that. Lawrence Oliver works at Boeing, is a former prosecutor where I met him. And then Scott Willis, one of my best friends. I met Scott in the George Ryan prosecution. As many of you know, he was the father who lost his 6 children. Really just was incredibly overwhelmed that he, in 100 days, learned as much as he possibly could about state government, and was a very articulate voice for us. And when folks want to say that corruption has no costs, they should look at Scott Willis. And that guy has every reason to say a pox on Illinois, but he rolled up his sleeves and did a lot of work. And so when folks poo-poo this report, or say it's dead on arrival, or say, who do we think we are, they have to look at who our commission was, what we did. 100 days, we were all over the state, Carbondale, Quad Cities, Springfield, Peoria, East St. Louis. Not a lot of people go to East St. Louis. We were there. We were in Rockford. We were in Kankakee. We were in Naperville. George Ryan's hometown, we had a visit to Kankakee. We went everywhere to listen to people talk about their government. And I wish some more of the folks who are poo-pooing this report, or say this stuff is pie in the sky, went some of the places we went. Because if they did, I don't think they'd be saying some of the things they're saying. Let me also talk about this report for the folks who want to critique it. Everything in here of any consequence is something that's being done somewhere else. 46 other states do some form of campaign contribution limits. 46 other states, it's the exact same number but different topic, 46 other states do either this one-party consent that allowed Pam Davis to go to the FBI but wouldn't allow her to go to the state's attorney. And by the way, on that issue, a lot of people want to say, you know, our state's attorneys, they're elected and you can't trust them. I mean, again, I'm a former federal prosecutor. I think that's garbage. Anybody can be corrupt. You know, we just had a trial at the federal building where a federal marshal was convicted of leaking secrets to the mob. And Gary Shapiro in the paper today called it an unforgivable sin. That was a federal situation. Those who say the state can't participate in corruption investigations, I think what they're really saying is we don't want the state in there because there'd be more people running around doing corruption investigations. But like in business, competition is good. And the reality is the feds can't do it all. And when you shut off an avenue with the state, as we are doing statutorily, you're going to have less corruption that's caught. That is a bad thing for the citizenry. Redistricting. And again, it's hard to both be serious and sarcastic about redistricting, but you look at Iowa, they do rectangles. You look at us, we do Cs and we do Rs and we do all sorts of different things. And the question is why? The census is done every 10 years so that you can have compact and contiguous and take account of, you know, the Minority Rights Act, and you can certainly take advantage of you know, racial issues that have to be accounted for. Iowa does that by computer. They obviously have a very different demographic. But people will say, you know, Iowa's different than us. Of course it is. But you can put in different numbers in a computer. Computers can do those things. And they can come out with a sensible redistricting process. But the question for redistricting is who picks our legislature? Do the citizens pick their legislature, or does the legislature pick their citizens? I submit to you, and again, I will debate anyone, anywhere. Right now, the legislature picks who the citizens are. That's wrong. It's undemocratic. And the notion that that can't be done this session, or let's wait, you know what, that's a great idea, but let's put that off. I mean, is absurd. And if we do want to do the Paul Simon Institute model, which is right now in the hopper, until we can do a constitutional amendment, you know, okay. But the notion that, you know what, we can do limits now, but we can't, you know, that redistricting, let's wait on that. I mean, I just submit to you that's unfair to everybody in this room. And it's unfair to the folks in the Quad Cities, or the folks in Springfield who have their congressional representative in the Quad Cities. So what will be meaning, and by the way, the redistricting kicker, when they can't decide on a map, they resort to sort of the ultimate insults. A lottery being done within Abe Lincoln's hat. Abe Lincoln's hat is pulled out, and they have this little ceremony where there's a Republican name and a Democrat name, and the Secretary of State, Jesse White, picks out, and that decides who wins. And literally, it's a political lottery. And the notion that Abe Lincoln's hat is used for that purpose is insane. It's absolutely insane. So, you know, where do we go from here? Well, you know, I'm going back to work at Perkins Coie. There's a 100-day report that we have out, and I would ask you to read it, all 88 pages of it. And I would ask you, you know, to let your legislator know what's good about it, what's bad about it. We are going to enter into the dialogue as best we can. We're going to ask Governor Quinn to expend political capital on this issue. We did yesterday. We're going to do it again. And I do have to say one thing about Pat Quinn. And again, none of our commission was about endorsing Pat Quinn, and I'm not here to endorse anybody. But one thing I will say about Pat Quinn, or two things. There's very few politicians in the state that would have given me the keys to this thing. So he had the bad judgment to do that, and I respect him for that. Number two is he said he would leave us alone and let us do our job. And he did. He also said he would let me pick the commission, and he did. He didn't get this report until the public got it. And I don't know, I know he doesn't agree with all of it based on what he has said publicly previously. And we don't agree with all his public statements. But I do respect the fact that he allowed us to do our work and do it independently. And that's another thing Illinois needs a little bit more of, is a sense of independence. And it's not about partisanship. And there are independent Democrats, there are independent Republicans. But what this state needs a little bit more of is people that aren't cowering in their shadow about how someone's going to react to the truth. There's a lot of truth in here. And I think the notion that it offends people that there's some truth in here, is just something that I don't think us commissioners spend a lot of time debating. And, again, you heard me name the names. They aren't shrieking violets, but we're also not, irresponsible bomb throwers. We're not people that are trying to say improper things or say something for effect or posture. This was an attempt, a good faith attempt, to get into the weeds on these issues, hear from the experts, hear from the people, sit down and deliberate and discuss. And again, those of you who know Hanky know she's not a shrinking violet. And I had no more ability to convince Hanky of my views than Hanky had of changing David Hoffman's views. But everything in this report is unanimous, with two minor exceptions that are footnoted. That to me is also extraordinary. We had people from both ends of the political spectrum, some of whom I don't even know today where they are politically, if they are at all. But we talked in good faith, we debated, we discussed. Everything in here is stuff I agree to. There's stuff I wish could have been in here, and I'm sure there's stuff that David and Hanky wanted in here that's not in here. But this is a document. They talk about majorities and supermajorities. This is a unanimous document by 15 people, many of whom were strangers to each other, who came from different walks of life, who have other jobs at the time. And by the way, this cost the state $0. And to me, when people can say what can't be done, I think in fairness to our commission, strangers got together over 100 days, worked hard, got all over the state, listened to people, would listen to anybody who wanted to come to us who had something to say about our issues, opened up a website, got 1,500 substantive proposals over our website, and wrote a substantive report. And again, next time I go to Springfield, which my wife willing will be tonight, I don't expect they're going to have a parade for us there, and we don't want one. But we do want some honest debate, and if someone wants to say something in here is loopy, tell me why. And if you say limits are bad, and there are good reasons to say limits are bad, is that because you want the status quo, or you think public financing is the way to go? These are the things people say. Limits. Oh, no, if you do limits, you're going to have a bunch of millionaire lawyers in the General Assembly. I mean, that is like talking point number one. Well, let's talk about the millionaires. We've had Jim Oberweis, loser, Al Holfeld, loser, political loser, and Blair Hull, loser. So it's not a fait accompli, number one. But let's take that further, okay? Because absolutely, if you can self-fund, you're going to have an advantage. But the question is, what's the alternative? Okay, does that mean we're going to stay disclosure-based? Well, the millionaires still have a leg up. Or does that really mean that you want to go towards public financing? If so, I'd love to have that conversation, because that's a good conversation to have. One of the reasons I don't think we can do full public financing is we need a state board of election that's not a bipartisan compromise entity, but that is an entity that can have some teeth. And they have some statutory teeth. But if you get on their website, and they dealt with us, and I'm not criticizing them personally, because we acknowledged them in our report, because they sat down with us, they engaged us, they talked to us. They have subpoena power. I asked them how many times you use that. And they said a couple times in the last 6-8 years. As a former federal prosecutor, one of the things I most miss about the government is the subpoena power. A prosecutor without a subpoena is just not a prosecutor. So, and I could go through the list of issues. And again, I'm not suggesting, and I may sound this way, and I don't mean to, we don't have all the answers. There are legitimate issues and legitimate good faith disagreements. But let me end with this. when we had our meeting in Peoria, we had Brad Mcmillan had some of his students address us. And we basically had the head of the Republican Party, the Young Republicans, address us, and we had the head of the Democratic Party address us. And they didn't say that's where they were, but you could tell from who their, who their idols were that that's sort of their perspective. But after you got past the introduction, their views on reform and ethics were identical. There was no, the Republican, young Republican guy didn't sing a different tune on ethics, integrity in government than the Democratic woman. And I really think that's something to remember. I mean, this is not, you hear this said a lot in the political debate, this is not a Democrat issue and it's not a Republican issue. It's just not. Integrity in government is a big issue. And people often ask, well, Collins, what's your political persuasion, or what are you running for? First of all, my wife will tell you this, I'm running for nothing, number one. And number two is, I am a one-issue voter. I am an integrity voter now, and maybe that makes me on the Green Party fringe, but I want to know, first and foremost, where do you stand, Mr. or Miss Legislator, gubernatorial candidate, on integrity in government? What political capital are you willing to expend for that issue? Because if you want to talk about budgets and tax increases and everything else, to me, you got to start with, where are you on integrity? And I think that, to me, should be the question for the General Assembly and for the media to be asking. Where are you on reforms? And if you don't want to talk, if acknowledging our report is something you just can't do, let's talk about all the bills in the hopper. Representative Osterman's bill on contribution limits. Senator Raoul's bill on judicial public finance. Anita Alvarez's separately sponsored bill on law enforcement tools. Where are you on those bills? They're there. You don't have to say anything nice about the Reform Commission. Where are you on those bills? So I think that's the debate that should be held and should be had. Someone asked me yesterday, is this more important than the economy? And the clip I saw in the news was me saying yes, but what I also said was, if you believe the polls, the recently published polls say that in Illinois, integrity in government is more important than the economy. And if you think about that for a minute, in this economy, how lousy it is, our law firm laid off some folks just a couple weeks ago. That's an extraordinary statement. So it is not to denigrate the seriousness of the economy, but it is to say that integrity in government is huge, and it's on the minds of the voters. And I hope it stays that way to 2010. So, ready for questions.
Water. Give him some water. Remember, we have the official forms. We have Teresa, or Mr. Tweed going through the audience. But you're a board member. You can walk up. There you go. And just to clear up one thing, and not what I would. Yes, I am disappointed that former Governor Blagojevich is not going to Costa Rica, because I'm in favor of him going with a one-way ticket in the jungle, bugs, snakes, and all the other things. You know how much money we'd save? But if there is a trial, as I told Mr. Collins, I want it held at the United Center. All right, here we go. So now you know where I stand. From Dawn Clark Netch, Mr. Collins, will the commission continue? Will you continue to be active on reform?
Look across the table and ask my wife. No, Governor Quinn asked us yesterday, can you hang around for 33 more days? Can you be available? Can you be on standby for 33 more days? The notion that the legislature will let out on May 31st. And I think, again, I can only speak for myself, and I see Hoffman's left the room. And I know Hanky has a job she's trying to get off the ground, but too much work was put into us I think we all said as a commission, we don't want this to be a doorstop. And so I think the short answer is yes.
Give me the question back, because she's Dawn Clark Netch. She gets two questions. I'm sorry, but reform has not yet come to the City Club. Why not public financing of elections? You covered that. You want to just say you did it already?
No. We are, in our report, we are for judicial public finance is a pilot project. And we say pilot project for a number of reasons. One is, I'm a lawyer. The notion that I can give $100,000 to a judge and appear before her the next day asking for something is crazy. That should be changed. We'll have a better judiciary, and I think a more judiciary full of integrity. So I think it should start there. And I think it should start there for another reason, which is we got to make sure we can do it right. Public finance, and one of the great things we did in our group was our first reaction was always, what are other states doing? And that was sort of our starting point. 25 states are doing some form of public financing. It's rare for a state to just do it all first. You got to make sure it's supported by the public, it's administered fairly and aggressively, and it's funded properly. Funding for judicial financing, I think, there's a nexus between the judges. One of our proposals is add penalties to civil and criminal penalties, which is, I think, something that Comptroller Hines has talked about. Tax the lawyers. What a good tax. We pay $300 to the ARDC. Tag on. There's so many lawyers in Illinois. Let's take advantage of that. That would add $10 million. So there's, I think, sources of revenue that are appropriate. The conflict of interest is most direct. It's the smallest, and it would allow us to administer it. To me, so a pilot project is what we propose. We also talk about adding on statewide and General Assembly if the pilot project is successful. But again, the folks in our group are not pie-in-the-sky folks. They want, the Kate Mayers of the world are used to doing a lot with a little, and they want to make sure things are done right. Our knee-jerk is not just do it all. Our knee-jerk is to do the smart thing.
From Anne-Marie St. Germain, a board member. If the state legislature is to act this session, the two key actors are the Speaker and the Senate President. Period. The end. Is this part of the problem?
Again, this may sound naive, but hear me out for a second. I disagree. The Speaker is very powerful. The Senate President is very powerful. They like their majorities. The people that are at risk are the people in contested races that go to their leadership and say, I need help on ethics reform. I think that's real. But I also say, again, the Senate President so far has given us very positive signals that he will give us an airing. And that's all we can ask for. So yes, they're very powerful. Yet we've proposed some things in our report that go to sort of the structural issue. But I want to take exception because, that's another one of our problems. There's 177 legislators in the House and the Senate. They're duly elected. They have to run for office. They should not be able to say, oh, I was for it, but the Speaker wouldn't, put it to a vote. That's what they say, and they can't say. We shouldn't let them say that anymore. We should get someone in there who will vote and who will take a position. And dare I commit blasphemy? Well, I'm not going to say that. We should get people in who will take a position and vote. Or we should shrink the legislature even further, right? Okay.
It's already down to 4. Professor Green just came up. From June Taylor from American Airlines. The realities, everyone says the realities. The realities are that most citizens do not know the extent of corruption in Springfield. How would you get the word out to the general public so that they can pressure the legislatures to vote for your recommendations?
It's a great question, and I don't know other than we did, I think, the things that we thought we could do on zero budget. We got around the state, we set up a website, and we've attempted to let the media know what we're doing, encourage them to follow us. And I think we've been partially successful in that regard. But I agree with the premise, which is education's an issue. In 2006, a lot more was known about Blagojevich, I think, by the general. If you paid close attention, a lot more was known about that situation that could have caused a more informed vote. And not to put it all on our legislative folks. There's the old Shakespeare line: "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, it's in ourselves. There is a real issue here about the democracy. We get the democracy we want, and part of it is there has to be a more engaged citizenry.
This next question is from Trudy, is it Zaya? Zaya, sorry. From a grassroots organizer. Were there any surprises, good or bad? How many, I assume that's aha moments, could you share one or two of them with the audience? A couple of ahas.
I don't know, Hanky. It is a toughie on the spot here. The town hall meetings to me were incredibly meaningful. Some of them were not as well attended as I would have hoped. Pat Fitzgerald said yesterday that he thought he was going to enter like a sports stadium and there were going to be people holding signs, and even this is from a Northwestern football coach saying this. My wife's from Northwestern; she gets that one. But I have to say, every one of these town hall meetings, I left with a renewed sense. There were incredibly thoughtful statements made by people of what change is necessary. And it was, sort of off the cuff. People think about these issues, and we got a lot of emails in that regard. So I'm struggling with the sort of aha moment, other than I think the people that had ideas, they were very, very eloquent ideas, and we tried to incorporate some in our document.
Okay. This is from that noted author, Jim Mariner. Governor Quinn's executive order called on the commission to draft legislation. Apparently, you did not. Any particular reason?
Well, Jim, you're wrong. We have publicly stated that we have proposed bills that have gone through the LRB process. In fact, if you would have been at our session in front of the Joint Committee in Springfield, there was some dialogue about that very issue. And as I also just mentioned in my remarks today, we're submitting. Our proposal has been submitted to LRB, and we have, according to the Senate President, until May 4th to put that into bill. So we have, and we are, and we shouldn't have to, but we're not legislators. But I actually don't think it specifically says what you say it says, but we are doing that because we think if someone wants to say, well, this is just a documented. Let's talk about legislation. We're doing that.
Here's a rather interesting question. Keith Kalinowski, member of the City Club, DOC. Department of Corrections? DQC. You corrected me. Okay. What do you attribute? Well, I don't know if this is a fair question, but heck, this is the City Club. What do you attribute the small audience here? Lack of interest on the part of Illinois citizens on business of reform? Is this disappointing? I want all of you to do one thing. Ooh, okay.
I've spoken to much smaller rooms than this. Actually, this is much bigger than I thought I was going to get. So, blame Jay Doherty. He's a lousy promoter.
I hope you enjoy your time here. Could be your farewell address. From that noted Dave Lundy, how will you define success? What must be pressed? Passed.
It's a great question, Dave. And we set out 6 topics. We said transparency, campaign finance, procurement, enforcement, government structure, and inspiring better government. We have that's how our report is set forth. I'm not here to say specifically what has to be done, but I do think our group will have a collective view. And there is the Supreme Court, famous Supreme Court justice, when they were handling a case about pornography, said, I don't know that I can define it, but I know it when I see it. And I do think there's something like that for us. We think every one of these 6 areas there should be meaningful reform. But I think we want to see the package and evaluate it in that context.
Okay, these are going to be rapid, well, as we used to say in the Bob Collins show, Patrick, these are rapid-fire questions with rapid-fire answers. Okay. A little South Suburban thing for you, Hanky, Here we go. This is from Bernie Edelman. Knowing what you know now, is there anything different that you would have done or needed?
I think the short answer is no. I mean, other than subpoena power. We had 100 days. There's not a thing that I can think of that we would do differently. Not a thing.
This is from Mike Levin. Legislation is necessary now, but what needs to happen in the long run to assure successful reform?
That's a great question, and I think, you know, we've talked about attitude changes, and we've talked about engaged citizenry, and that sort of perhaps fuzzy stuff that it would take a lot longer to talk about. But people's attitudes have to change. We have to expect more. Louisiana now, Governor Jindal goes on 60 Minutes and basically was asked about corruption in his state and said, no, we passed the laws, we leave that to Illinois. And when the governor of Louisiana is taking shots at that, I mean, that should make people stand up. So, but I do think attitudinal issues are huge.
From Joyce Washington, you do need more citizen engagement. How would you grade the media involvement during, okay, a little confusing question. Let's leave the first one out. How would you grade the media involvement during the process?
You know, good but not great. I think the reality of newspaper business is obviously very difficult. I think the Tribune editorial board has been phenomenal in terms of keeping the issues. I think the Sun-Times, similarly. I mentioned the Daily Herald. Paul Mikey from Channel 7 went to almost all our hearings. He did profiles on some of our commissioners. And I just single him out because, you know, he did do it. When we got outside of Chicago, there was a lot more local interest. When we were at Carbondale, we were sort of mobbed by the local media there. And so, you know, I think it was good but not great. And again, my comparison is the scrum outside the federal building with Governor Blagojevich. And again, I get it. I realize that's news. But, you know, it'd be great to see a scrum outside the Springfield with the legislative leaders walking out when we talk about ethics reform.
Two more questions. From Judith Reese. Have you heard of any reaction to your report from the four tops, the four legislative leaders? Thank you for your work.
Thank you for the thank you. We, as I think I mentioned, we did hear from the Chief of Staff to the Senate President, who gave us what I saw as a positive sign. Senator Heather Staines, again, has agreed to host a group for us legislators to speak. You know, I hand-delivered copies to the four tops, so to speak. I mentioned Tom Cross had called me. That's been the reaction thus far. You know, and obviously there's been some stuff in the paper.
And this last question is from Paul Green, very sharp fellow, for those you don't know. On redistricting. Redistricting has been a problem since 1818. Why change now? Since the motto of this state, in my old pal Milton Rakoff's words, were, one map maker is worth 500 precinct workers.
Well, and again, I'd go back to the video. It would be funny if it wasn't so serious. We have a General Assembly in a congressional situation that's gerrymandered. And, you know, I remember learning that term in 8th grade, gerrymandered, and knowing gerrymandered equals bad. And for some reason, you know, when we get to be adults, gerrymandered is okay, or that's what we have to live with. So I just don't see why we have to live with it, and that we wouldn't have to if we demanded that it's not there.
How about a big round of applause for some real... Hold it, Pat. What happens now can pass any ethics reform that's ever passed. These are known as the City Club gifts. An official City Club mug, unopened. A one-year membership in the City Club. Hanky, you want to maybe, yeah, you want to talk. And Jim Mariner's book on the history of the City Club. All valuable, but not worth much. Here we go. Round of applause. Great job, Pat.
Thank you.